Hi, I'm Bob Butler from KCBS Radio. Welcome to a forum to discuss Measure J, which will be on the ballot March 3rd in the primary election. Today's forum is sponsored by the Contra Costa Clerk Recorder, Contra Costa Television, the League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley, and the League of West Contra Costa. We're recording these roundtables here in the studio of Contra Costa Television. As part of our live broadcast, we invite you to ask the candidates questions. You can direct your messages or post to Twitter @EngageCoco. Measure J asks voters if they want to pay another half-cent sales tax for all purchases made in Contra Costa County. Measure J requires a two-thirds vote. Money raised will go to the following transportation-related goals: improving countywide transit and transportation, including buses, ferries, and BART, reducing congestion and fixing bottlenecks, making commutes faster, improving air quality, and repaving roads. Measure J also authorizes the Contra Costa Transportation Authority to issue tax bonds to finance planned area transportation projects. Joining us to discuss Measure J is Newell Arnerich from Danville. He's on the Contra Costa Transportation Board. He's one of those supporting the measure. And also joining us is David Schoenbrunn, President of the Transportation Solutions Defense and Education Fund. He opposes the measure. Thank you both for joining us today. Thank you to our panel. Let's talk about why we need to have Measure J.
Well, thanks for hosting us today, and particularly the League of Women Voters. And David, nice to meet you. As a 34-year Contra Costa resident, a 25-year elected official, six-time mayor, an architect, urban designer, and a planner for 42 years, I've realized that the world has changed. Most people don't realize that back in 93, 94, when the first major economic crisis happened in the state of California post-Prop 13, Caltrans got out of the business of building roads. Thus, cities and counties were left, what do? How do we plan for the future? How do we accommodate moving goods and services and people? Contra Costa had the foresight just a few years before that to say, we are going to be one of those first self-help counties. We've demonstrated from building projects like the fourth bore of the Caldecott Tunnel, building nearly 10 miles of E-BART extension, where we couldn't get BART to extend there. Their system, they don't want to do it. There's an environmental group that's held them hostage. But yet we need a robust transit system supported along with actual transportation movements for cars and automobiles, people, and trucks. We have demonstrated through our self-help that we are the best in the United States. We leverage more money, we accomplish more, we build projects on time and under budget. Given that history, we're looking forward. We have one last opportunity, and most people don't realize this. Legally, this option to provide one additional half-cent sales tax was given to both us and to Alameda County, given the uniqueness, our rapid growth in population. That expires at the end of this year. We will never in our lifetime have another opportunity to do this. So you can either plan for the future or let it happen. And we're seeing nearly a 350,000 to 400,000 new residents that will be here in Contra Costa County alone. We have a roadmap to the future. I think that the value proposition that our voters are going to see, as they've seen in the last Measure J that we've had, of that on-time performance of delivering goods and services, that this new Measure J will deliver on its promises.
Well, we had the gas tax go up another 12 cents per gallon to provide $5 billion a year for transportation projects around the Bay Area.
Statewide.
Statewide.
Right.
So why do we have to have a special tax for Contra Costa, given the fact that people that come to Contra Costa that don't live here will pay the tax but won't benefit from the money?
It's kind of like there are different taxes. It's kind of like I need a sweater and I need a coat, and they really are this way. That money was really for local agencies fixing potholes and things like that. It was also to help give back money to Caltrans, which doesn't really have funding to build roads. So that's pretty well prescribed for that money is. It did not go to build a new 680. It didn't go build an extension of E-BART all the way out to Brentwood. those monies are not eligible for those things. They are monies that were set aside in one of those categories, other than local roads and streets, was to be if you are a self-help county and you raise your own money and you have a good project, we'll partner with you, and you're eligible by competition to get some of those funds. So we as an agency, and particularly since our executive director, Randy Iwasaki, who came from Caltrans, he was the head of it. That's a political appointee, but he was a career person. He's considered in the world one of the best, most brilliant, forward-thinking transportation planners on the planet. With that in hand, we have leveraged 3 times for every dollar. So if we had $1 billion in the bank to do projects, we've been able to raise almost $3 billion to match that. So the statewide transportation tax was actually part of that, is to do that. With this, we will be eligible for those funds. Without this, we're not, as a county, eligible. We'll be standing here looking at the future while it's running over us.
Mr. David, you don't agree with this tax. Could you, what Mr. Arner said sounds pretty logical.
It does, until you understand the bigger picture. We just heard about the planning that Contra Costa Transportation Authority has done, and it has an executive director who's paid a higher salary than the governor of California, by the way. The problem with the planning of CCTA is that, yes, they admit that there's going to be a 27% increase in population. They are projecting that literally every single one of those new residents will be driving during commute hours. That's what the 2017 Contra Costa Comprehensive Countywide Transportation Plan says. And when you throw that many more cars onto the existing roadways, which are not going to be expanded by much in this measure or in any other measure, the result is a 166% increase in hours of delay. So what we have here is a tax whose primary message is we will reduce congestion. And their own plan says, well, unfortunately, congestion is going to increase by a great deal, and the average speeds on both the freeway and on arterials will drop according to the adopted countywide transportation plan and its certified environmental impact report. What this says is that CCTA has not planned for a future of growth, because the only way to improve mobility under circumstances like are being projected, the only way is if these new residents live in projects that are transit accessible. And that's not what CCTA's own analysis shows. So this says that there is a profound problem with future land use in this county that will result in crushing gridlock, no matter whether they claim it's going to reduce congestion or not. I can say my organization assisted a lawsuit in which we attempted to challenge the language of Measure J, and in fact the very use of the letter designation Measure J, because that's the existing sales tax measure, and we're concerned that it's going to confuse voters who will confuse it with the existing tax. There are billboards up on all the freeways that show construction projects funded by Measure J. We didn't want the voters to be confused by that being thought to be a reference to the future Measure J. In addition, we're troubled by the absence of an actual project list in this Measure J. A typical sales tax measure will propose a list of projects. It will give you their cost and say, we will deliver these projects. That's not what's being done in Measure J. It is either a bold venture, bold move forward into hornswoggling the voters, or it is a horrible mistake on a policy level, because voters will not know what they're actually voting for, and they will have to trust the board members of CCTA for 35 years, who will take charge of a doubling of the sales tax, and in the process thereof do unknown things. And so they were unable to provide any kind of modeling for what this measure would do, because the projects themselves are undefined.
You said a doubling of the sales tax.
Absolutely.
Half cent is not a doubling of the sales tax.
Oh, absolutely it is.
So you're saying the sales tax now is a half cent?
For transportation.
Oh, for transportation.
Under the existing measure.
So it's a half cent doubling of the transportation sales tax.
Well, and I would, since you use the term half cent, I'd like to call attention to the fact that the ballot language, unlike the ordinances that CCTA and the Board of Supervisors passed, the actual ballot language, instead of saying a 0.5% sales tax, says a 0.5 cent sales tax. And we believe that's also deceptive, because that's not a rate. A cent is not a rate. It's not a shorthand for percent.
Well, it's a half cent on the per dollar.
Yes.
Explain that. I mean, I'm
That
getting
is
confused here.
correct,
Well-
but that's not what the ballot language says.
Okay.
If I'm going to answer. So there currently is a half-cent sales tax that expires here in 14 years.
2034.
And that half-cent sales tax is in place and will stay there. That project, the project list, the programs are all in place for that. The majority of those projects are completed as they were planned. As I mentioned, the E-BART extension, the Highway 4 improvements, auxiliary lanes on 680, the technology improvements on Highway 80 in West County, the fourth bore, the Caldecott Tunnel, all of those. That is in place. This is a new tax measure of a half cent, and it will last for 35 years. And just as an example, this is just off the website. There's a list of the projects, that list detail. And that's similar to what was in the last two tax measures, and very similar to what everybody else. And I know where you live.
Technically,
Just-
those are categories, not
Excuse me, if I could-
projects.
David, I can finish, and I'm sure I'll get back to you. Where David lives in Marin County, they have similar measures that they do, and they're doing good work. And in Contra Costa County, I remind you that we have done,
Categories.
since 1989, when the Contra Costa Transportation Authority started, that same methodology. What is really unique, and which is really the most forward-thinking of any plan I've seen in the United States, and particularly here in California, is that we have figured out you can move about 2,000 cars per lane in traffic under today's safety zones, the restrictions in the way lanes are designed. There are advancements in technology, because we can't pave our way out. We don't have any more road width. We don't have those things. So those traditional ways of trying to say, let's add all the lanes, we've done just about all of those. But there are some on the list that are here. We're going to go back in to help improve flow through the Caldecott Tunnel on the 3 existing bores. Why? Because we see on the new design, that's a bigger bore, better lighting. We can't make the other bores bigger. That's a project that would take more than all this money to fix. But we can improve it, make it safer. But more importantly, the technology that we're developing, and there's nobody else that right now is as close as we are. We just received and approved a grant last night from the federal government that will partner with us for $8 million on doing the first technologically driven improvements on the corridor of 680 through the San Juan Valley. The estimates are you can move 3,000 cars. Is that the only solution? With 350 to 400,000 new people coming here, we have to plan for it. If you think gridlock is bad now, just do the math. You're going to add another third of computers doing nothing. We know what that result will be. This is a plan that has both programmatic, it has more investments in new transportation solutions, from ferry to bus on shoulders to other E-BART extensions, because BART won't extend. We're going to have to pay for it.
Well, that's.
And we proved that it works, right?
But why won't BART pay for it? Because
Good question.
taxpayers in Contra Costa County have been paying these taxes since what, the 50s?
Well, BART originally started in 1959, I think.
Yeah,
In
so
the fall of 70.
people who have been paying taxes for this extension since the 50s, and we're being told it's too expensive, we can't do it, so the counties are now having to take this on. That doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, that's 30 years. That concept of that, BART's monies that they're getting, as we all know, aren't going to expand BART. They're going to repair BART and hopefully add some capacity if they get a new train control system. The new cars are the same size cars. They eliminate seats. You put more people because you can stand on it, so they're going to be more crowded.
That'll be fun, standing from here to the airport.
Right, so when you go to work in San Francisco, it's going to be challenging. There are a lot of things we can do. We are on the cusp of people getting it, like Bishop Ranch, Concord, our job centers, live, work. San Mateo County, for every 17 jobs they created in the last 20 years, built one house. Us? We expanded. I looked it up again today just to make sure I was correct. We had a population increase in 20 years here of 21%. We're going to have an additional 34%. But we built the houses for the rest of the Bay Area. The rest of the Bay Area population increased 15%. We went up 21%.
Yeah.
We're doing our fair share of housing.
Mr. Schoenbrunn, you talked about no actual projects. The first thing I see on this funding category is relieving congestion on highways, interchanges, and major roads. And the very first one is improving State Route 242. Anybody who's driven out here in Contra Costa County, and I live where I live, you have to take 242, and it becomes a parking lot between like 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So that's one of the first things they want to do. What's wrong with that?
Well, the biggest problem here is that when you step back and look at a systemic level, you realize this problem cannot be solved in the way that CCTA is proposing. They have hopes, I call it techno-fantasy, that they're going to be able to cram more cars into freeway lanes. That's not going to be viable for an awfully long time. You'd have to essentially change out the vehicle fleet, install a huge amount of infrastructure at public cost. I don't believe that there's any reality to it other than people being desperate and not having any other answers. To me, what this says is that when you have a county with dispersed land use, essentially a suburban county, where it's only convenient to get to and from a home by solo driving, there is no solution when the population gets to this point. The only solution is, first of all, to not make it worse by not adding more suburban dwellings that require solo driving to get to them. So what's needed is a change in land use patterns, and what's needed is a focus on transit. You can't, well, I read transportation articles all the time. It is so well known that you cannot build your way out of congestion, and to me, that's what this measure, at least half of it, is doing. And so that money, in my mind, is just completely wasted.
So if this measure does pass, are you saying that it doesn't matter what we do, we're not going to be able to solve the traffic problems?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So given the fact, now I've lived out in the East County since 1995. When I first moved out here, Highway 4 was like 4 lanes until you got to what became the Pittsburgh Bay Point BART station. And then it went from 4 lanes to 3 lanes to 2 lanes, and then back up was all the way up the Willow Pass. Now,
This is what happens when you approve housing without
but
transportation.
we're not talking about housing now.
No.
Wait, we're talking about this measure.
It is the
And
history of this county.
But you sit here saying the CCTA doesn't know what it's doing, but I'm one that has driven on Highway 4, was sitting on those backups. Remember Lake Loveridge, when the Loveridge would flood whenever it would rain and people would be stuck in their cars. Now you have 4 lanes going all the way out, I think all the way out to Lone Tree Way, almost to Brentwood. And the traffic in that way is much better. The bad problem is in the morning when you get on the freeway to go in, it still backs up starting at the railroad.
Exactly.
I'm not sure what you're going to do about that, but given the fact that, as Mr. Arnrich says, that we're going to increase the population, I'm not sure those numbers are right because more folks are leaving California than coming in, but given the fact we're going to have more people living here, what do we do? If this is not the solution, what is the solution?
The solution is building housing around vibrant and frequent transit facilities, okay? That when we have 1.3 million people, which is the projected population for this county for 2040, you have not a transportation problem, you have a mass transportation problem. You can't solve a mass transportation problem with people in their own cars. There's literally not enough space.
We need to get our facts straight. I was just going to say, and I appreciate David, and Marin County is different. It's the poster child of what not to do for how to build urban environments. I mean, it's beautiful, it's bucolic. Contra Costa took a different path, and it started back in 1988. We are the first county, the first self-help transportation agency that said land use planning and transportation must be tied together. You cannot approve a project unless you can support it with a transportation system. We're the first to do that. That was reaffirmed. I was the one here in the South County area that led the affirmation of our urban growth boundary. And what an urban growth boundary says, they looked at all the general plans, the way all the cities were here in the county, and said within those existing areas, you have enough capacity, and also by state law, you have to have show capacity to accommodate your future growth through housing, jobs, and all of those. We have that here. We have affirmed it. We have all of the environmental groups, both from San Francisco, the peninsula, none from Marin County, and Save Mount Diablo here, that all support this transportation plan and our past Measure J and our past Measure C because it ties the links, which nobody else does. You can't build on the other side of that line. And this is one to help. This will help West County more than it does in our area. Out in the San Ramon Valley, there are people always trying to get across the line. Out in Brentwood, they're trying to get. Nobody in the history of the urban growth boundary has stepped across that line. We are the only agency. There is nobody else that's building transportation systems. We put a ferry in and opened it only, 9 months ago in Richmond to San Francisco. We didn't even build a parking lot because there was parking there. We figured it'd take 1 year to 2 years. We had to get a parking lot under construction in 60 days. We did E-BART extension for almost a 10-mile extension. Same thing. We're not sure that people are going to use this. We're now building the parking to do that. We, in this measure, a project is to build this out to Brentwood. Those are hard, real. We have 1 million car trips from the San Ramon Valley that are taken off the road by one thing, buses. And by the way, they're moving our children around. So we have those things in place. It's transportation. It's a whole plethora of things that it takes
I need
to
a rebuttal.
do that. So.
Okay, go right ahead, sir.
You talk about being the first county to link transportation and land use.
As an
Great.
agency, but
Great. However, we have to step back and ask, how well has it worked?
very well.
And, well, I think the very fact that the sole purpose of this tax, or at least the marquee way that this tax is being promoted to relieve congestion, says that there's actually a problem with the way transportation has been linked to land use. I would argue it hasn't worked adequately. And as a result of my involvement with Contra Costa and its planning efforts, I put forward a proposal that my colleagues in Sonoma County have carried to go for Urban Growth Boundary 2.0, in which the idea is that every lot that has development rights now would get literally a development right, but they would not be able to build off away from transit corridors where there will be frequent transit. And so the idea would be to transfer the future building away from sprawl and onto areas where there will be high-frequency, high-reliability transit. That was a proposal for Sonoma County as a mitigation measure for the congestion that was shown in the environmental impact report for Contra Costa's transportation plan. We put that letter in as a proposed mitigation measure to show Contra Costa what it could do to reduce the environmental impacts that were found to be significant. And the response to comments was snide, obnoxious, and it said this has nothing to do with our plan.
Again, if you're watching this at home, you can actually tweet a question to our guests at @EngageCoco. You talked about the E-BART extension, which, like I said, I've lived here a long time. I've taken that train. I'm still frustrated that I can't get a parking spot in the parking lot. 1,000 spaces, and if you don't get there by 6 in the morning, you can't park. You can't even get a permit anymore. Will this measure, if it passes, will it go to helping build that garage faster? And will it make more permits available for people that want to be able to park there? Say if I want to go to the airport, I can't even get an airport parking permit in the Antioch BART lot.
Yeah, well, I think when you look at overall what's happening and what we can solve, the list that I was showing there are some of those solutions. E-BART is really important. Why? Because people ride it. Our ferry service, really important. We didn't think people would ride buses. We had to get buses in a parade with a bunch of kids on it to show parents. Kids then contacted their parents and said, Mom, I want to ride the bus with my friends Sally and Billy. And now we have 1 million car trips. With this, we'll go up to 1,500,000 car trips we'll eliminate. And that's just in the San Ramon Valley. The E-BART extension out there will help relieve. But what we're doing, one of the things that I think is missed, it's the counties to the north of us that are the problem. You look at, it's just simple math. Look at the statistics. How much traffic is coming from the north, passing through our county, going south all the way down to San Jose and Fremont, cutting through and going to 24. That's our single largest increase, not us. Our planning standards, our linkage is what the rest of the Bay Area needs to do, should have done, and they wouldn't have the mess that they're in on the peninsula. And we're being asked to provide more housing through, as you know, all the legislation. Contra Costa needs to do more of its share. We've done more than our fair share. So, yes, the answer is this has that specifically in there to add parking, to add that extension, to add more ferry service, because we know it works. We need alternatives. Getting in the car isn't going to. But when you look at when does traffic work, there's one day a year it works. What day is that?
Christmas.
Columbus Day. Columbus Day has a 12% effect. About 12% of the population, it's a regular work day for most people, but 12% of the population has that day off. And here in the Bay Area, it's proven over the past couple of years as we've peaked out in job employment and people cutting through our county, we found that day it works. So it's an interesting real-time model to show how many cars can get through the system. So the technology, it's right here. My phone now in my new car tells me what's happening above. I ought to slow down. It does have an infrastructure. This has the infrastructure that we're putting in our freeways that will tell people, accident ahead, move over to the right lane, slow to 35 miles an hour. You will get to your destination in 20 minutes, 28 minutes.
I have to disagree with you on Columbus Day. The 2 weeks between Christmas week and New Year's week, traffic is lovely.
Yeah, well, but I meant a regular kind of work day as a sample of, it doesn't take that much to get the system to work right.
Okay. One of the things that you brought up, Mr. Schoenbrod, is the fact that we're building too many houses.
No, we're building them in the wrong way, in the wrong patterns. Okay. We're using, it's not too many houses, it's that we're putting them on large lots or even relatively small lots, but we're spacing them out so much that you can't provide effective transit service, and that the only convenient way to get to that house is with a personal car. Mm-hmm. When you do that, the future for this county becomes grim. There literally are no solutions when you're adding more houses like that. And so if there were infill development happening, and there is promotional material associated with this measure that claims that, but there's nothing in the measure itself that is incentivizing cities to go infill. That's something that ought to be the part of any future measure.
But how do you do that? Because just take Pittsburgh and Antioch and Brentwood. There's a BART station at Pittsburgh Bay Point. There's the one at Railroad Avenue. There's the one at Hillcrest. They want to move it into Brentwood, but you can only build so many homes around those hubs.
Higher.
So you're telling people you want to build apartments, high-rise apartments.
Not necessarily high-rise, but higher. Single story, ranch homes, that's obsolete. In terms of new construction.
But people, that's why
they
move
may
here.
like all kinds of things, but when you have 300,000 new residents who like that and buy cars, that destroys the ability of every resident to get around this county. It creates an insoluble traffic problem, and that's exactly where this county is currently heading.
Well, I think that's off point a little bit, if I could answer. One, that's great. If you want a heavy-handed government, and we know what those look like, tell her that you're going to go live in a mid-rise building, and you're going to have to live here, and no, you can't have a car. That's not where our government is, and I don't think we have that right. That's another discussion about housing and how to do that. Let's be factual. This county has demonstrated better how to do transportation, has had a better success. We have 20 staff members, 20 people that work for that agency. It's one of the leanest agencies around. We know in this area how to build, we know how to plan, and we know what urban growth boundaries are and the role that they play to make lives better. As I said before, statistically, we have, from the counties to the north of us, are driving through our communities because they think it's easier to get. So if we want to put toll gates up, I tell you what, our freeway system's going to work perfect around here. That's not what we can do. That's not how democracy is based. We are not an agency that can tell people how to build houses, but we can link, as we have done in the past, all the major, from Spur to Greenbelt Alliance, Save Mount Diablo, all the biking, all of those entities support this measure as the best solution for the future. And the future is going to look different than it is today. We're going to be driving different. We're going to be transporting ourselves differently. It's going to be more transportation. This measure does that. We either do it or we do nothing. There is no alternative at this point.
You said put toll gates on the freeway. That would slow things down. Look at the Bay Bridge. It's terrible.
Well, they back it up to the county that's causing the problem because it's not us.
Well, yeah,
And we can't do that.
I'd like to raise some points here.
Sure.
First of all, I'd like to point out today's East Bay Times has an editorial in it, "Plan to double Contra Costa transportation tax falls short. Voters should reject Measure J, and backers of the measure, starting with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, should try again." This is a very strong editorial that says this is not a good idea. I am highly aware that every local government body in the county lined up in support of this. I'm saying they're mistaken. The East Bay Times is saying they're mistaken. Yes, there are environmental groups that signed on to this. I believe they were sold a bill of goods. There's lots of nice language in the tax expenditure plan, but none of it is mandatory. It's all flowery language in which there's no enforceability. It all comes down to the politics of the CCTA board. And I myself don't feel that I can rely on that to achieve the goals. The other thing in today's East Bay Times is California is not on track to meet 2030 climate goals. And the sole reason for that is transportation. Our transportation emissions are increasing because people are driving more. The CCTA transportation plan shows per capita driving, the amount of driving individuals do, is actually going to increase slightly in the future as compared to now, when the whole point of the state's climate policy is to reduce the amount of driving. So that's not happening here.
But how do you change people's minds about how they get around, especially?
Simple. You establish a priority that it is the good of the larger number that matters. And if you get people convenient transit that is faster than driving, you're going to see a remarkable shift in how people get around.
Is there enough money now?
If it weren't wasted.
Wait. Is there enough money now to establish the kind of transit you're talking about?
There's certainly enough to begin it. And if almost 50% of this weren't going into highways, the answer would be yes.
But that's for this measure. I'm talking about you oppose this measure, and you're saying we need better transit. Is there money now to create the better transit you're talking about?
Let me talk about that, because part of the problem is a regional problem. We have been feuding with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission for over 25 years now. This is the body that controls where all the money goes. They have been spending money on essentially supporting solo driving all this time, and it has failed. I mean, it's just apparent when you look at the commute around the Bay Area. This is not working well.
Well, let's bring this back, to be honest. Let's bring it back to Contra, Costa County.
Well, he asked me a question. I'd like to answer it.
Right,
and,
on the transit for
the
Contra
answer
Costa
to
County.
your question is, had MTC been willing to use its funds to build the transit network that we needed back in 1995, we would not be talking about a $100 billion mega measure that might be on the ballot in the fall, because the money was there and it could have been spent wisely, but was not. And we argue that Measure J is exactly analogous, that it's not being spent properly.
So we have an ethical and a moral obligation, whether you're a resident or an elected leader or a volunteer with these organizations. I wouldn't discredit any of the organizations in this measure in putting together a plan. And you have to plan things. It's like, if you want to get out of that chair, you either do or you don't. We have to have a plan. This is a plan that is different. It is forward-thinking. It's an advanced planning device that we have not looked at in the same way in the past. We have partners, and by the way, if these projects don't meet a standard, and the number one criteria is reduce vehicle miles traveled, those projects can't be approved or will allow to go forward. We create out of this a significant new board that oversees and has to review every project, and it has guaranteed seats from all of those stakeholders, from the environmental groups. Nobody else in the Bay Area has done that. And while we can moan and groan what other counties have done, or what, from where David's from, Marin County hasn't done a great job in a lot of areas, wants to be kept out of this conversation. We don't want to have to provide housing. We don't want to have to do that. But we're going to tell you how to do it in your counties. We are the county that's leading the way. We will not sit back. We have a value proposition for our voters. And you know what? Our proposition has been solidly supported by 2/3. That's a really hard mark. You mentioned that at the beginning. This has the safeguards, the checks and balances, which we haven't had them to this extent in the past. We've had good checks and balances. This concerns me about the oversight, but it's a high bar. And you know what? The world we live in and going forward, for my kids, your grandkids, we need to leave in place the tools that they can predict their future. This does not lock people up for the 35 years with only one solution. It allows the money to go forward. It will be revisited every so many years by that oversight, by the board, and that board will change over time, but it has in perpetuity all of those stakeholders who have a seat. Nobody's done it.
We are out of time for our discussion, but we do have time for closing statements. I want to thank both Mr. Arnich, Mr. Schoenbrunn for being here talking. It was an impassioned discussion, but we didn't throw any blows or anything. I mean, these are very important issues that we have to deal with, and I really believe that you've gotten some really good information today in order to make a decision. So each panelist will now have 90 seconds to make a closing statement. And Mr. Schoenbrunn, since Mr. Arnott spoke last, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. The number one concern about Measure J is that it misrepresents its very purpose. The claim that it will reduce congestion is entirely false and cannot be supported in any documents that the agency has presented. In fact, their environmental impact report shows that congestion is going to get 166% worse than it was in 2013, and I'm referring now to 2040 levels. So this tax measure cannot deliver the relief that voters expect when they read that claim. What they're actually saying is there will be a relief of congestion. It will not be as bad as it would be if we did nothing at all. That's a very low bar. This is a blank check. There is no telling what would actually get spent on. These are funding categories. These are not projects. And I call the language loosey-goosey. There's no telling where the money will go. It's all subject to the discretion of the board. They claim that they'll have a cleaner and safer BART. That's complete nonsense. They have no jurisdiction over BART. I call this greenwashing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Arnrich.
Well, Bob, thank you very much to the League of Women Voters. Thank you for hosting this. This really is the only forum. I have to tell you that I strongly disagree, and respectfully, as somebody who's been in the business of planning, not only communities, new towns, transportation systems, I am honored to be able to work with an organization that has demonstrated it's one of the best in the nation. It is forward-thinking, and as I showed before, you can go to the Contra Costa website, look under the 2020 Transportation Expenditure Plan, or called TEP, T-E-P, and in there you'll see the list of the categories, the projects, the terms, the conditions, the oversight, the standards, the vehicle miles reduced, in addition, the 11 guiding principles that all projects have to go through. This is the future of Contra Costa County. Contra Costa is different than any other county, as I've said before, where we act and we plan. We do know how to do planning, and we have tied strongly, most definitely more than anybody else, the link between development and transportation to make sure that they are in balance, and those things have proven to be successful. We have an urban growth boundary that is still part of this. It is mandatory. Cities and projects cannot participate in this project unless those principles are upheld and demonstrated. So I ask you, join me, ask you with our environmental partners, all of our stakeholder groups, our fellow transportation agencies who all support this project, please join me on March 3rd. Vote yes for Measure J. Vote for your future. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our forum on Measure J. Mr. Arnrich, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr. Schoenbrunn, thank you very much. For more information on the measure, visit the website votersedge.org. To view this broadcast online, you can go to www.cocovote.us. The Elections Office would also like to remind voters to go online to check their voter registration status and consider if they'd like to switch to receiving their ballot by mail. I'm Bob Butler. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to vote by March 3rd.